Hi there, it's me, Tofu Soy. Here's something you might not know about me. I'm one of them vegans you keep hearing about. Alright, stop it, you jackal. See, this is why I don't like talking about it. You always end up inserting booing noises into your videos. Let me tell you, vegans make it hard to be vegan sometimes. I like aminals and I want the environment to be good, so I thought, yeah, okay, I'll do that thing. I don't want to. I'd prefer to eat almost exclusively cheesy gordita crunch wraps from Taco Bell, think outside the bun. But it's for the animals. I'll do it. And I've been vegan for the past 6 years or so. Very little actually tempts me to eat of the forbidden flesh at this point. That is until other vegans, particularly white vegans like myself, start speaking. It makes me want to eat animal products out of shame so that people don't associate me with them. You know exactly the type of shit I'm talking about. Some complete skunk ape tumbles butt backwards into a discussion of indigenous hunting rights to say that actually, all hunting is wrong, says I, the arbiter of all that is good and holy. Some granola-ass yoga influencer cornering you at a party to explain that eating a buffalo wing is the exact same thing as murdering a baby. Or, you know, anything PETA ever does. PETA out there saying, eating a chicken sandwich is literally the Holocaust. No, it isn't, PETA. The Holocaust was not on chickens, it was on human beings. Not quite the same thing. Animals and people are different. You might pretend like they're not, but you don't protest wolves eating animals. You do protest people doing it, so it seems to me like you do understand the distinction, actually, PETA. PETA, there are plenty of genocides going on right now that might more rightly be compared to the Holocaust than eating a zinger twister. That shit is so embarrassing, and everyone who hears it and isn't vegan thinks, well, I better not go vegan because apparently it turns you into a self-satisfied asshole if you do. And while I may be a self-satisfied asshole, I assure you that I was one long before I was vegan. This is such a whiff, because it should be such an easy argument to make. It shouldn't require wild theatrics and smug posturing to convince people, actually, maybe it's wrong to torture animals. Maybe we shouldn't do that. That should be a pretty easy thing to argue. And while I think veganism is generally the morally superior option for those that can live on it, I don't think I'm anyone's moral superior. I don't have the right to sit in judgment of how you or anyone else in the world eats. Considering all of the plastic I waste on Beyond Meat burgers, I don't think I'm in a position to do that. And let me just state, for the record, as clearly and unambiguously as possible, no settler on stolen indigenous land has the right to condemn traditional indigenous hunting practices. Indigenous people were living sustainably with the land for thousands of years until we showed up and fucked everything up for them. And I think it's a little rich to then decide that since we can't treat animals responsibly, we have the moral high ground to people that have demonstrated that they can. If you disagree with that, you're probably just a racist. Go away. Anywho, while I generally avoid cringy vegan takes like the plague, one has stood out lately and is perhaps the cringiest take of them all. The YouTuber Unnatural Vegan recently did a YouTube titled Anti-Capitalism is Anti-Vegan, and I was like, buh? But then I thought about it a bit more and I was like, nuh-uh. It's linked in the description below if you'd like to watch it. It's only 14 minutes long. My video will be longer because I like to talk more than she does. I'm not particularly familiar with Unnatural Vegan. The only thing I know about her is the one time she on accident fully endorsed eugenics, and Faye Fahrenheit had to explain, actually, preemptively aborting disabled people is evil, which, like, you'd think, right? You'd think that someone whose whole thing is about valuing the lives of animals might stop and think, hey, it's kind of fucked up that I'm saying some human lives inherently have no value. But one thing I've learned is that stopping and thinking about what you're saying is not exactly Unnatural Vegan's strong suit. And that might sound unnecessarily harsh, but I mean it. I don't want to be mean, but everything she says in her video is so completely wrong in such easy to correct ways that it actually makes me pretty mad that she put it up to her 250,000 subscribers. Seems to me, based on the 2 videos I've seen from her at least, that UV takes a position based on her gut instinct, argues it from a place of authority, and does not for a moment stop to ask herself, wait a minute, why do people disagree with me about this? Why do people get mad when I talk about this? If she did, I assume, she would demonstrate some sort of understanding of her opponent's position so that she could argue against it. But she does not. She makes basic errors that could be corrected by just skimming a Wikipedia article. And I know that she had Wikipedia open because she cites Wikipedia several times in her video. I'm not talking about things which require a huge understanding of economic theory here. I mean just like knowing what the words are that you're using. Like just knowing the basic concepts you're talking about.
Part 1. A selection of terms Unnatural Vegan does not seem to understand.
Take, for example, when she defines neoliberalism like this.
For those who don't know, neoliberal is like your typical left-leaning social progressive, but also being generally pro-free market with few restrictions on a lot of industries like housing, but also very pro-welfare state, as libertarians would say. Neoliberals want a substantial safety net, often even supporting public options like healthcare, for instance. Not all neoliberals do. Of course, there's going to be disagreement.
No, that's not what neoliberalism is. Like, full stop. There's no room for interpretation here. She's just wrong. Neoliberalism is an economic theory of deregulation, austerity, and globalization. It's actually neoliberal policy to reduce government spending on welfare and government aid of any kind. This is not me making a moral judgment. That's just what the word means. Whether or not you think it's the right way to run a society is immaterial, but it isn't, obviously. I have no idea how she arrived at the conclusion that neoliberalism is equivalent to what she's describing, which is actually called social democracy. If I had to guess, she probably looked at the dictionary.com definition, which reads, neoliberalism, noun, an outgrowth of the liberal political movement that is more moderate than traditional liberalism, especially in its embrace of free market capitalism. And then her train of thought probably went something like, liberalism is, I don't know, Bill Clinton, who himself was a neoliberal, or something like that, so therefore, to be more moderate than that is to be Bernie Sanders, a social democrat type. But the term liberalism means something very different in most parts of the world than it does in the United States. Economic liberalism means complete deregulation and privatization, and neoliberalism is a renewed interest in that kind of liberalism. Hence new liberalism, neoliberalism. That's the word. If you scroll down on dictionary.com to the British dictionary section, it also reads, neoliberalism, noun, a modern politico-economic theory favoring free trade, privatization, minimal government intervention in business, reduced public expenditure on social services, etc. That's what it is. It's a better definition. But this is all academic. I don't know for sure that she got her definition by misunderstanding the dictionary.com definition, since she offers no source for her wildly incorrect understanding of what the word neoliberalism means. Maybe she just heard lefties using the term derisively to refer to any and all liberals, as many do, incorrectly, and just took it to mean extremely liberal, which, you know, as a North American would mean, among other things, being very socially progressive. It's not what the word means. She did it wrong. She got the word wrong. Likewise, she has a very inconsistent view of what exploitation means, and it sends her into a complete logical tailspin, making some wild arguments that are legitimately difficult to tease apart the logic of. She posts this screenshot from Wikipedia with some economic jargon about exploitation with no explanation. She presents this as an ideologically neutral statement, that exploitation can only occur in imperfect capitalism due to imperfect competition. But if you actually look at the Wikipedia article, though, you'll notice that it's under the neoclassical notions subheading, which she seems to have deliberately cut out in her video, which strikes me as a little dishonest, i.e., it's how neoliberals view exploitation, but not simply the default view of what the word means. Every other paragraph on this Wikipedia article said something different about exploitation. The one she chose to highlight is the one which conveniently conformed to her worldview. I have to wonder whether she actually read anything on this page, because it's chock-a-block full of socialist critiques of exploitation. If she did, she certainly did not demonstrate an understanding of it in this video. Every paragraph, except the one that she quoted, would blow pretty much every iota of her argument here out of the water. She rejects what she calls the Marxist definition of exploitation,
which is essentially begging the question when you define anti-exploitation as requiring Marxism because you've defined capitalism as inherently exploitative. I don't see any reason to accept this definition, the Marxist definition of exploitation. I think it's much better defined as unfair use, and what exactly that means is a lot more complex.
That's just the normal definition of exploitation, and what she's actually attempting to dispute is whether or not the term applies, not what it actually means. She extrapolates that while such relations may be unjust, and I swear to God, she makes this argument, this is not me strawwomaning her, not all injustice is harm. Injustice becomes harm when it harms people.
Injustice in and of itself is not harm. It's only harm when the consequences of injustice actually harm people or sentient beings. And that harm can range from material harm, disease, lead in your water being shot, to immaterial harm like damaged self-esteem.
Okay, so first of all, that's tautological. It's self-evident that something which does not cause harm is not harmful, like, by definition. But also, how can something be unjust but not cause harm? What, if not causing harm, makes something unjust? It's just a really weird idea to not explain or give an example of a type of injustice which doesn't hurt anybody, but is still an injustice. To not clarify why injustice in and of itself is not a problem, and what kind of injustice you could have that wouldn't be a problem, that would be fine to do. But beyond that, she doesn't at all grapple with whether or not capitalism is inherently exploitative. She mentions that some exploitation happens, but gives really weird examples.
Is there sometimes or even often exploitation in capitalistic systems? Of course. There are unambiguous cases, like obvious cases of exploitation, like wage theft and broken contracts. The same with animal agriculture.
Like, those things aren't what socialists mean when we say exploitation. Wage theft is just straight up theft. It's not exploitation of labor. It's stealing. It's theft. It's also worth pointing out that it's not some incidental problem either. It's the most common form of theft by a wide margin. Over $50 billion a year are directly stolen from workers. By contrast, according to FBI crime stats, all burglaries, larceny, and motor vehicle theft and robberies combined in 2012 were about $14 billion. And that statistic should give anyone pause to wonder why, under capitalism, employers are incentivized to steal from their employees so often, and why it seems like they get away with it so often. When socialists talk about the exploitation of labor, we're not even talking about those abuses. We mean like that bosses extract surplus value from a worker's labor. If a worker creates $10 in value, for example, the boss can pay them $2 and pocket the other $8. And while I think it's safe to say that we view this as morally wrong, it's not a moral term. It's just what exploitation is, to use something or someone for your own benefit. That's the meaning of the word. Now, if you don't think there's anything wrong with that, it might behoove you to, I don't know, say why? Make that argument in your video that has your arguments in it? If she understands what socialism, communism, or anti-capitalism in general are, she doesn't demonstrate it in this video. She briefly flashes the Google definition of socialism, but then later describes socialism as...
Since socialism is commonly defined as like a transitional state to communism, communism being the goal, I'm going to focus on communism here.
So the rest of her argument should therefore rightly be addressed towards communism, or rather whatever she thinks communism is, instead of socialism or general anti-capitalist sentiment. Now, there are a lot of socialists who define socialism to mean the transition phase between capitalism and communism. Not all of them. I don't, and neither does Karl Marx. But there are a lot of them. Most people, at least in the West, and therefore likely the majority of her audience, define it more or less the same way as the Google definition that she put on screen. She even highlighted the relevant part about the means of production being socially controlled. She just doesn't acknowledge that part. She doesn't say anything about it. To just flatly state that socialism is the transition phase to communism shows she didn't really look into what socialists believe. She doesn't seem to even understand that this point is hotly debated between different socialist ideologies, or indeed that there are different socialist ideologies. She's reducing dozens of discrete schools of thought into a monolith, and then not really engaging with what that monolith she created believes. What does this transition phase entail? What happens in that phase? She does not, at any point, demonstrate an understanding of what social control over the means of production is, or why socialists want it. That'd be like me trying to refute veganism without ever talking about animals or plants. But if socialism is just the transition to communism, and communism is the goal, it seems to me like it would be very important if you wanted to dispute communism to know what it is. I would define communism, when used to refer to the economic system, not the ideology that tries to build that system, language is confusing, to mean a stateless, classless, moneyless society where production is designed to meet human need instead of profit. I don't know what Unnatural Vegan thinks communism is, because she does not explain that whatsoever. And she does not seem particularly interested in discovering why people think it would be a good idea or something worth fighting for. Also, despite defining socialism as a transitional phase between capitalism and communism, she uses the terms socialism, communism, and anti-capitalism interchangeably, so I don't know what the fuck to think. The only thing I know is that she thinks it's a bad idea, based on evidence.
Part 2. Unnatural Vegan has information that will lead to the arrest of communism.
There's a lot of evidence, you see. Lots of evidence, which suggests that communism is bad, actually. She repeatedly stresses this point. It's key that you understand the evidence backs her up on her ideas. And if you look at the evidence in an evidential way, the evidence evidences capitalism good.
But that only matters if there is an alternative that is better, that if the harm that capitalism causes is worse than some sort of evidence-based alternative. But there is no evidence-based alternative. Or there is one, but the evidence goes in the opposite direction. It's unreasonable to advocate for hypothetical alternatives when they range from untested to repeated failures. Again, you can't just reason out the ideal economic system for humans or for a particular country without evidence in practice. That's not being rational, it's not being scientifically minded, it's being dogmatic. I don't think intent is any excuse in the face of overwhelming evidence of harm. If there were evidence that veganism had the same catastrophic consequences that communism does, like we couldn't grow plants without manure, or we didn't know how to make B12, then we couldn't say animal agriculture is wrong. We couldn't advocate for its abolition because we would have no viable alternative. When it comes to economics, the claim that we have a viable choice in communism just is not true. There is no evidence for it being anything other than a horrible, dangerous political theory when put into practice.
My, looking pretty bleak for the commies now. How can they withstand this evidence? It's just there, off screen. All of the evidence. Let me just scan through the video for some of this evidence that I keep hearing about, and okay, not in the video. Weird. Let's look at the sources. Maybe she listed some evidence there. No? Okay. The point I'm making is that she doesn't give us the evidence. She doesn't give us any reason to think that communism is bad, just that there exists evidence somewhere that she will not show you. Which is difficult, right? Because there's nothing to refute there. There's no numbers or claims that I can look into and research and see whether she's right or wrong. To be fair, she does sort of give some examples of communist atrocities in the form of some JPEGs she got from Wikipedia. Gee, wouldn't she look like a big hypocrite if I had JPEGs from Wikipedia of capitalist atrocities? Don't you think? Her JPEGs include images of the Holodomor, the Russian famine of 1921, and some people going to work during Mao's revolution, which, I mean, why two famines and then leave out the biggest famine in human history to show a picture of the guys who proceeded over it just going to work? Jesus Christ, you can't even be a dishonest anti-communist correctly. And look, fuck all of the people who made the decisions which either led to or exacerbated those events. I'm an anarchist, and those countries don't represent what I want or the methods I would choose to get what I want. Although I think it's a little dishonest to attempt to pin the famine of 1921 on socialism, considering Russia had just gotten out of World War I, and they got wrecked in that war, and there was a big old drought, but let's just assume full responsibility on the part of the Bolsheviks. Let's just assume it was their fault. Let's grant her that. Plenty of people go hungry under capitalism. Right now, the overwhelming majority of the world is capitalist. I would actually go so far as to say pretty much everywhere is capitalist. She might dispute that, but that based on what, again, what the words mean, that the private control of the means of production, yeah, pretty much everywhere is capitalist. And about 25,000 people die per day of hunger alone, according to the United Nations. That's over 9 million people a year, and that's not including deaths due to malnutrition-related illnesses or the amount of people who are food insecure. I'm just talking straight up people dying of hunger. So right now you're thinking maybe those people are dying in the evil socialist countries, right? Well, according to a report by the World Food Program, of the 10 most food insecure countries in the world, being Yemen, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Afghanistan, Venezuela, Ethiopia, South Sudan, Syria, and Nigeria, only one could even in bad faith be considered socialist. While Venezuela has a democratically elected socialist leader, the country is still capitalist. Like, electing a new leader doesn't magically transform the economy. Yemen, the Congo, and Afghanistan alone were responsible for a third of all food insecurity, roughly 42.8 million people. One might note, these countries are not socialist either in practice or ideologically. She stresses that communism has always failed without really going into detail about what that means. You know, like, what does it mean for an economy to fail? Let alone why communist ones always have. There's no pass-fail state for economies. This isn't a video game. You don't win or lose. So, like, does she mean that so-called communist countries always give in and go back to capitalism? Because if we accept that countries like the Soviet Union or Maoist China are communist, as she does, then no. There are plenty of countries that are still ideologically communist, some of which have been for multiple decades. Does she mean that communism makes people poorer? Because that doesn't really seem to be true either. Like, specifically, the two communist countries she gave as examples, the USSR and China, both lifted enormous amounts of people out of poverty. I'm not a big fan of either, but I don't think anyone could realistically claim that these countries made their citizenry more poor than they already were. Is it about human rights abuses? Because that's hardly unique to communist countries. A lot of capitalist countries had legal slavery until pretty recently. Some of them still do. Some of the ones that technically don't have workarounds that make people slaves in everything but name, like prison labor or child labor. The only really concrete measurement she discusses is GDP, and she implies that communism has some sort of negative impact on GDP. Like, she says it's not conducive to having a GDP that provides a good standard of living. Couple problems with that. First of all, does it? China, one of the only two communist countries she gave examples of, I just have to keep stressing that, has the second largest GDP on Earth. Don't know about that one, champ. Now, there are plenty of poor countries which are nominally communist, though there are far more poor countries that are nominally capitalist, to be fair. But it seems like the economic woes of those countries might be more rightly attributed to embargoes and sanctions placed on them by capitalist countries, in a deliberate and coordinated global effort to keep poor countries dependent and servile to rich ones. Like, do you think that the United States has an embargo on Cuba out of concern for their human rights abuses? Because the United States has relationships with countries with far more worrying human rights records, like Saudi Arabia, or Israel, or the United States. Thanks, I'll be here all night. Tip your waitstaff, they work hard. Secondly, even if it did have a bad impact on GDP, who fucking cares? Fuck GDP. All my homies hate GDP. Gross domestic product is a measure of the total amount of money in a country. That's not a country's good economy score. If one person in the Republic of Fartbutt has $22 trillion and the remaining 10 million people had literally no money whatsoever, Fartbutt would have the world's highest GDP and the world's highest GDP per capita. But would that be an accurate reflection of how well their economy was doing? Anyway, the point is that she has all this evidence, you see. When people are hurt under socialism, that's evidence that socialism is bad. When people are hurt under capitalism, that's not because of capitalism, because capitalism is just the default state of affairs in her mind. The damage must be coming from somewhere else, perhaps some sort of socialist goblin.
Part 3. Okay, whatever, but is anti-capitalism anti-vegan?
No. Obviously not. When UV actually gets around to explaining why she thinks anti-capitalism is anti-vegan, it's completely incoherent. She claims that socialism renders activism pointless by reducing each purchase into an act of consumer choice, which... what?
Without capitalism, eating plant-based is just symbolic. You know, promoting personal consumer actions and boycotts and alternatives as morally meaningful makes no sense.
You're describing capitalism. She claims that socialism makes veganism's most powerful tool moot. Veganism, you see, can only affect the world by changing production, like buying Beyond Meat burgers.
Morality is a product of choice. When it comes to dietary habits and food production, we have a choice, and we need to start making the right choice. A denial of capitalism or opting out of capitalism in principle, not only does this make vegan ethics irrelevant, it fails to do good in the most cogent way that veganism acts on the world, by changing production. It's a failure to be vegan in any sense, from ethical principle to consequence.
That is reducing activism to consumer choice. You're doing the thing you're so bad at this. The whole thing of socialism, like the socialism of it, is that we, meaning everyone, control production. Social control of the means of production. Socialism. That's where the word comes from. We do that, instead of whatever heartless ghoul happens to own all of the stuff and the money. I can't even understand what she means by this, to be honest. Because maybe she's assuming that under communism the state controls production. But even if that were true, and it's not, it's the opposite of true. Wrong, you might say. You could still petition the state to make more vegan shit. It's wild to me that she goes the whole video and does not address the most obvious argument for veganism being by necessity anti-capitalist. The whole reason that we have factory farming and all the weird, gross, unnecessarily cruel ways to treat animals is because it's really profitable. If you want evidence that capitalism leads to suffering of animals, just take a look at how we treat animals right now. Because capitalism is doing that already. Absent the profit motive, why would anyone keep chickens in these dark little cages for their whole lives? Do you think people like doing that? Maybe some sadists out there do, but the reason it's the dominant way to raise chickens isn't just because the world is full of sadists. It's because it makes shitloads of money. In an economy that people have more input in, don't you think people might say, hey, I don't like the way that we torture the chickens. Stop torturing the chickens so much. If the economy were centered around human need rather than bourgeois profit, will we use 10 times the soy calories to produce 1 beef calorie? Seems to me that might strike some people as a little inefficient without the lobbying industry tipping their fingers on the scale. I'm not saying that socialism would make everyone go vegan. It would not. But neither will capitalism. But for the people producing food, I think they'd be incentivized by basic empathy to treat animals better if they didn't have to cut costs as much as possible to deliver value to their shareholders. She spends this whole video saying we have to look at evidence. We can't reason ourselves into a perfect economy. We've got to look at the data. Well, the data's in. Looks like animals are having a pretty bad time, actually. Looks like maybe the earth might fucking die. So why doesn't that data count? She talks about socialism being somehow forced on people and says that's wrong because we can't just tell people what to do. That's cruel to people, you see. So instead of telling people what to do, we should continue in an economic system where people are completely beholden to the interests of their bosses, where someone literally tells them what to do every day, or they don't get money and then die on the street. You don't think it's cruel that people without money have to freeze to death? You don't think it's cruel that such poverty tends to disproportionately affect BIPOC and LGBTQ+ people? Also disabled people, remember them, the ones you wanted to abort? You don't think it's cruel that poor countries have to accept austerity measures imposed on them by rich countries or get sanctioned into oblivion? You don't think it's cruel to live in a world where despite producing enough food for 10 billion human beings, 11% of the 8 billion human beings on Earth are starving? Meanwhile, Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos have enough money to just feed them all several times over? That doesn't strike you as a cruel system? You don't think it's cruel to just look at the system we have and say to yourself, well, it's the only thing that we know works. Works for who? I'm not exaggerating when I say that she considers capitalism to be the default state of human affairs. Anything which happens under capitalism is just how things are, and anything which happens under anything else represents a disruption. Capitalism is the control group against which all other economies are to be measured. She literally compares capitalism to eating food.
Talking about ending capitalism because of the inevitable harms without some solution, without something that actually works better, is like talking about ending food because food on some level is inevitably harmful. True, but, maybe dying is worse.
Capitalism represents like a 200-year blip in a 20,000-year history of humanity. It seems to her like it's the default because it's what we've all lived under for our entire lives. But it's not. And it seems fucking ridiculous to me, actually, to suggest, oh, sorry, everybody has to continue being an underclass so that a few billionaires can get half of the money on Earth. We just don't know what would happen otherwise. Well, we don't know what would happen if we stick with capitalism either. And looking over the data that we do have, it seems to be Armageddon. She ends her video by claiming she does not have an ideology. She says that she's not committed to capitalism or neoliberalism, by which she means social democracy but doesn't know it, but that she's fervently anti-capitalism.
I don't have any political ideology. I'm not, fervently pro-capitalism. I'm not committed to that. I'm not even committed to neoliberal. It's just kind of the closest descriptor to what I currently believe in terms of politics. I think the only kind of label I fervently defend for myself would be consequentialist. But I am definitely anti-capitalism and communism.
Oh no, I'm not pro this thing. I'm just adamantly against being against it, which is different. The thing is, Unnatural Vegan, you do have an ideology. You haven't put a lot of thought or effort into it, but you have one. Oh hey there, thanks for stopping by. This is the Solidarity Corner. This is where I like to come to relax, have a hot cup of mud, and promote small leftist projects that need solidarities on their work. Thanks for the positive reaction to the last episode's Solidarity Corner. It was really weird to try something new like this that I've never done before. I'm glad it's been received as well as it has. First of all, I want to acknowledge a few other channels which also made responses to Unnatural Vegan's video. I haven't watched these videos yet because I don't want to plagiarize their arguments accidentally, but they're from channels I trust, so they probably have something good to say. I feel like I should mention them both because it's a little unfair that my video will likely be seen by way more people than theirs. They probably worked just as hard as I did, so that's some bullshit. You can also watch my first reaction to UV's video with Sam from We're in Hell and Chill Goblin. Link in the description below. Secondly, if you'd like to learn more about the intersection of anti-capitalism and veganism, I highly recommend the channel of my pal Mexie, who talks about that junk all the dang time. See also her podcast Vegan Vanguard. Okay, with that all out of the way, the small project I'd like to extend my solidarity to is Catherine Klein. She also makes videos about the intersection between anti-capitalism, social justice, and veganism. Like her latest video, which is a response to Unnatural Vegan's video. God damn it. I'm sorry, it takes me a long time to make videos, okay? Anyway, the video by Catherine I'd particularly like to highlight is this one where she tears apart Sam Harris's completely mindless arguments against veganism. Pro tip, if you ever want me to watch a video, I highly recommend making one that dunks on Sam Harris because I'd love to see people do that. Fuck Sam Harris. Anyway, everything he says in that video is asinine, and it's nice to see someone point that out. Hey, do you got a small project you'd like some solidarity for? Well, do me a favor, why don't you send an email to thoughtslimematter@gmail.com with the word Solidarity Corner somewhere in the subject line, and important details like pronouns and stuff, and just one, please. I don't want to get like spammed with them, and maybe I'll highlight you here. This video's too long. Thanks for watching. If you've made it this far, why don't you leave a like? But only do that if you liked it. If you didn't like it, you can either leave now and with your dignity intact, or hit the dislike button and admit to the world that you didn't like this video and watch the whole thing like a sucker. Hey, you want more videos? I put them out all the time, every week. You can subscribe if you want to see them. Ding dong that little bell, and then you'll get notified even. I don't know. You want even more videos than that? Oh, geez, you're really twisting my arm here, but okay, I'll tell you what. I don't tell everybody this, but I'll tell you because I can tell you got a discerning eye for YouTube videos. You can find more of my videos over at youtube.com/ScaredyCatsTV. Those videos are about horror movies, so that's what you'll find there. More videos for you to watch. But if you, let's say you don't like YouTube videos, you like Twitch streams. That's fine, you can catch me streaming every 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time at twitch.tv/thoughtslime or just youtube.com/thoughtslime, either one. I want your money, give it to me. Give it to me now at patreon.com/thoughtslime. Hand it over. That's really how I'm gonna do it, I guess. That's really how I'm going to do the Patreon plug this week.